Hello and welcome to the Flipping and Wholesaling Houses show in New York. Flipping and Wholesaling Houses in New York show. I'm Michael Pinter, where I teach you how to start flipping or wholesaling houses, and if you're already doing it, how to grow your business. Sorry, turning this thing. Okay, so I got a couple of questions about buying occupied property. So I've always bought occupied properties. I think I've discussed it a little bit, but I'll get into it more. One of the reasons why I buy occupied properties is because A, it differentiates me from a lot of other investors. A lot of investors won't buy occupied properties. Now, in New York. Now, a lot of them, because of what they've been told or bad experiences they've had in New York City. In New York City, it is a nightmare getting somebody out, right? It could take 18 months uncontested, but where I operate in Nassau and Suffolk, it's usually less, it's 3 or 4 months. So what I have found is that a lot of sellers, and this is going to sound crazy, I know, but I know because it actually happened to me, a lot of sellers only sell a property at a huge discount because they do not want to confront the tenant. Sometimes the tenant's a relative, sometimes it's a friend. I made this mistake about 15 years ago. I bought a property near my house. It was 3 units. One of the tenants, I befriended them. Big mistake, don't ever do that. And he was like a handyman. He did work for me on other properties. And then of course, couldn't pay his rent. Became a big problem. I literally sold that property at a loss. I had to bring a check to a closing of a sale. I'll never forget that closing. One of the worst closings I ever went to. And the reason why I sold it to somebody that cheap was because I did not want to have the confrontation with them. So that's a mistake I've never made again. But there's a lot of landlords out there who do not want to have the confrontation with their tenant, and they're willing to sell it to you at a discount so that they don't have to deal with the tenant. So today, so what does that mean today in general? So now we're still at the end of 2020. It's still a moratorium where we can't evict, but that's hopefully ending in a month or two, and hopefully. But what happens when you buy? So I'm in contract now on 4 properties that are occupied. So a couple of things you want to do. First thing you want to do with the seller is you want to have a conversation with them, but can they start the eviction process? Now, obviously, if it's a situation like I just told you where the guy doesn't want to confront, he won't. And one of the properties I'm buying, that's the situation. He won't confront them. The other ones didn't care as much. They were okay if it was like a business-like transaction. So they are starting the eviction, and I'm taking over. So they gave them notice, right? So the basic eviction process, without getting into all the details, is you have to give the tenant notice that the tenancy is ending, right? Hopefully, you can't do this during the lease, so hopefully the lease is ended and it's month to month. You have to give them notice, and it's different times. I think now you have to give 90 days notice, which is a long time. And then at the end of that 90 days, then you get a court date. You summon them to court. You have to have them served. The first notice, you have to have them served with the court notice, and then you show up to court, and the process starts. It gets more complicated. So what I always try to do every time I buy an occupied property is I go to the tenants first and I say, listen, I don't want to spend the money on attorneys, on court fees. I don't want to spend that money. I'd rather give it to you. So let's work something out where you can leave by a certain date. The sooner you leave, the more I'll give you. I always offer money first. That is always the best way to go. And the problem is a lot of tenants won't even have that conversation with you. I would say 50% of the tenants maybe will even engage in a conversation, and only a portion of those will actually come to some kind of negotiation. Most of them feel like this is not something they want to deal with. This is going to be expensive. And by taking some kind of buyout from some greedy landlord, then they're making a mistake. It happens, but sometimes it works. I always try that first. But even if they agree, whatever they say, I always start as much of the eviction process as I can. Always give them notice if I can from the seller. If I own the property, I give them notice. So I never stop the eviction process because most tenants, not most, a lot of tenants are going to lie to you, right? The 2 most common lies they're going to tell you are, I'm just looking for a place. As soon as I find a place, I'm leaving. I once had a guy that I believed because all this stuff was in boxes. I figured he was moving out. Those boxes stayed there for 4 months until I figured out the guy was full of crap. And the other thing that a lot of people tell you, and I've been told sometimes, I want to buy the property. I want to buy the property from you. I just need to get my financing. Those are 2 very, very common things that they say. And if it works out, that's great. But never ever pause or stop the eviction process when you get told something like that. Always do that. So if you buy a leased property with tenants on lease, you cannot evict, right? You can come to terms if they agree, but you cannot start an eviction process if they're under legal lease. So I usually don't buy property with the tenants are lease. I just had a property that I really wanted to buy, and the landlord had just signed a 4-year lease with a tenant. So that was a situation where I said, I'm not going to get into this for 4 years and make substandard rent. Didn't interest me. But most tenants that are out there, and certainly for somebody who's looking to sell a property, are not under lease. And they're month to month, so you can do the eviction. So it's something you have to do. Actually, it's not something you have to. It's something that I choose to do. Most investors out there will not take a property that's occupied. I mean most. I mean probably more than 95%. So if you are going to buy a property with an occupant, you are differentiating yourself from most other investors. They don't have a lot of other options. If they need to close fast, or they need, and understand, if a seller's selling a property with an occupant, he cannot really sell it through the traditional means, right? And a lot of sellers don't understand. They think, well, if I have a tenant who's paying rent, any other landlord is going to want that. But 99 out of 100 landlords are not going to want somebody else's tenant, because A, they're going to assume that the tenant's a problem. That's why they're selling. Even if they can prove that he made the rent, doesn't matter, that he's making the rent payments, doesn't matter. And B is they generally, including me, I want to screen my own tenants. I want to see what kind of people they are. So if you have a guy who wants to sell a property that's occupied, he cannot go through the traditional means of listing it with an agent. And most investors are going to say no. So that leaves me, or if you want to, buy an occupied property. So I'm a fan of it. I do it. But there's a lot of details about how to do it. And you need to make sure that you follow the law. And you need to make sure you have a good attorney. So do not use an attorney who doesn't specialize in landlord-tenant issues. You want to use an attorney. If anybody wants to use mine, they're in Hempstead. Two great guys. I really like them. But you have to follow the law, because if you screw things up, and I recently had a property where I did screw things up, and it cost me 4 months, right? I'll tell you the mistake I made. The law's changed now, but the law used to be in Nassau. You had to serve the tenant before the end of the calendar month. I closed on the property the last day of the month. I had them served that day. Then when we got later into court, the guy had an attorney, and he said, we're going to challenge the service because you closed at 4 p.m. and you didn't have time to serve. Now, I didn't want to get into it, but if they challenge the service, the whole process starts again. So I just started the process again and served them. It was my screw up. So don't do anything stupid. Use an attorney who knows it. Don't use an attorney who thinks he knows landlord-tenant. You need to use someone who's really, really, really focused on landlord-tenant issues. You want somebody who represents tenants and landlords, who knows the system. And if you follow the law, it doesn't take that much longer. Now, in other parts of the country, evictions take a month. In Texas, I think it's 35 days or 30 days, and the sheriff comes with a gun and gets them out of there. It takes longer in New York, but in Nassau and Suffolk, where I operate, it's 3-4 months. In the city, it's a different story. It takes much longer. And if you're going to buy an occupied property, you need to be able to get it at a deep enough discount that you can sit it out and wait, because this could take a long time. And if the guy is represented, it could take 2.5 years, 3 years. So you need to be prepared for that. That's one of the reasons why I don't buy in the 5 boroughs. So if you are interested in how I can help you, go to howtoflipnewyork.com. If you like these videos, please click like. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. Please put any comments in. This video topic was by request. If you have any topics, put them in. There's no topics that are too basic. Sometimes I just make assumptions that people know the things I know, and I know it's now, when I think about it, it's not true. But if I just, and don't worry about if I just did the topic. If I did the topic, I'll just send you a link to the video. So keep requests coming. Thank you very much for watching.